Hi, everybody, and welcome to our online lectures. In this opportunity, we will be discussing the digestive system, something that we call the journey from the mouth all the way to, well, I think that you have an idea on where the journey of the digestive system ends. So let's dive right in to an overview of the organs of the digestive system. Um, Besides the normal organs that we know for the digestive system, which would be the stomach and the large intestine, the small intestine, we have other organs that are accessory structures of the digestive system, and they involve the liver. And one of the main functions of this liver would be the production of bile, the breakdown of fats, the storage of iron, and very, very importantly, toxin removal. This is an organ that is highly specialized for removing things that should not be on the body. The gallbladder is the storage site for bile, which is produced by the liver. So we got to think of the gallbladder as a storage site for the substances produced by the liver. And then we have the pancreas, which is incredibly important in the production of insulin for reducing or controlling the levels of glucose in the blood. Also, the pancreas is involved in the production of digestive juices. Let's talk now about some of the activities or things that happen in the gastrointestinal tract. First thing that we have in there, it's ingestion. And we are all very familiar with what ingestion is. It involves eating. It's taking the food into the gastrointestinal tract. Actually, and we can put it this way, the digestive process begins since the moment that we put food in our mouth through the process of ingestion. After ingestion, we have something called propulsion, which is the action of moving food through the GI. And after that propulsion, we have a very important term that we have to remember, which is peristalsis. And this is waves of contraction and relaxation of muscles of organ walls. Peristalsis is one of the movements that your body is going to do to move food down the GI tract. So it is controlled by muscles, and it is a very slow process, and it is there is a reason why this is this way, and we will discuss it as we move along with the presentation. The mechanical breakdown, it increases surface area of food for better digestion. This is a physical breakdown of the food that starts from the moment that we start chewing food from in our mouth. And the reason for breaking down food this way is that smaller particles or smaller pieces of the food, it increases the surface area. And the surface area is the available surface for enzymes or acids in the stomach to break down this food into smaller components. So it's very important to have this breakdown of the food so that the digestive process would be a lot smoother. In mechanical breakdown, it also involves what is called segmentation, and segmentation it's the mixing of the food with the digestive juices, for example, in the stomach. So it's a constant process of moving food up and down, left and right to mix all this food with digestive juices, and it is in there where you're going to find that acid environment, where you're going to find the enzymes that have the ability to break down this food into more elemental components. Digestion would be the breakdown of complex food particles to their chemical building blocks. And let's just refresh. What are those building blocks? Those building blocks are going to be your carbohydrates, your fats, your amino acids or your proteins, and the nucleic acids needed for regular and basic cellular function. So what is digestion? If you want to put like a general term of what digestion is going to be, it's pretty much taking these very complex molecules that we find in food. We break them down into little pieces. We use enzymes that are contained in my body, and I want to break down those really complex molecules into smaller molecules, into one of the four or the four groups of fundamental molecules: the sugars, the fats, the proteins, and the nucleic acids. After the digestive process, we have another thing called absorption, and this is the passage of digested end products or the nutrients into the blood or the lymph. So after we break down all of these complex molecules, we need to pass them through the intestine all the way to the blood so that it could be distributed to the rest of your cells, and that is what absorption actually is. And then Finally, defecation, little joke there in parentheses, number 2, defecation is the elimination of undigested substances via the anus. So the process starts at the mouth where we move things down into the stomach. In there, we move things around, broken down food, we mix it with gastric juices, enzymes break it apart. Then it moves into the small intestine where absorption actually starts from all of this nutrients that I have. And then finally, whatever I can't use from my food, it will make its way through the large intestine all the way into the rectus and the anus to be eliminated later from the body because there is nothing of use in those substances. Let's talk now a little bit more about the anatomy of the gastrointestinal tract or the GI tract. Most of the organs in the abdominal cavity are surrounded by serous membranes. And probably from 135 you would remember membranes, and they are covering pretty much everything in the body, and membranes in the GI tract are very important. These membranes are the peritoneum, which is the biggest of the membranes that we have in all of the GI tract. The peritoneum can be divided in two based on their location anatomy, the visceral and parietal peritoneum. The visceral peritoneum covers the external surface of the organs. Visceral, remember, we're going to associate visceral with organs of the visceral peritoneum, which is the membrane. It's the membrane that would be directly in contact with the external surfaces of organs. And the parietal peritoneum lies the body walls. The peritoneal cavity, I'm going to find that in between my peritoneums. So that would be this space in between that. And if we refer to the image that we have in there, here we have the gastrointestinal tract, I might say, and I have the visceral peritoneum covering that. And as you can see, this is a continuous membrane that kind of like folds into itself to create this peritoneal cavity, or the space in between the peritoneums. Here we have the parietal one, which is close to the walls of the body, and the visceral ones which are surrounding the organ per se. Also in there we have what's called the mesentery, and the mesentery are fused layers of the peritoneum, and it forms a double peritoneum layer. So where is my mesentery? If you look at it in here, it's where those membranes kind of like are really close to one another, so they fuse together, and that is what we call the mesentery, or the mesentery membrane or layer of the GI tract. It provides routes for blood vessels, lymphatics, and nerves. So this is pretty much a gateway for all of these necessary organs to provide food and nutrients and transport to the gastrointestinal organ. So this GI tract is made of cells, and cells need their nutrients. They need oxygen, they need glucose, they need several things in order for them to function. How do they make it all the way down there? Well, the mesentery, it's the answer to that question. Retroperitoneal organs, it's another term that we're going to encounter a lot when we read this chapter, and this is organs that are not covered by the peritoneum, so they are external to the peritoneum. For example, the kidneys are a good example of this. The duodenum, the colon, the descending colon, the pancreas are all organs that are outside of the peritoneum, so they are not a part, they are not technically inside of the peritoneal cavity. Very important things to keep in mind from all of this. Let's talk about more about these layers that I can find. So now we're looking deeper into the GI tract. There is a couple of things in here to keep in mind, because if we understand the layers and the membranes and the components of the GI tract, we will understand its function a lot better. There is 4 basic layers for the alimentary canal. Number 1, we have the mucosa, or the mucous membrane. The mucosa is a moist epithelial membrane that lies the lumen of the alimentary canal. So now that word lumen, let's refresh that. The lumen is the opening, it's the empty space, inside a hollow organ. So if this is the mucosa, it's the layer that covers the lumen. This will be like the most internal of the layers of the GI tract. And if we follow that, here we have our mucosa. This will be the lumen of the GI tract. So the mucosa layers are going to be that first layer that actually makes the walls of the internal parts of the GI tract. Some things that it would do, it secretes mucus. Mucus helps maintain things moist. It eliminates aeration inside of the GI tract. It helps with the absorption of nutrients. It provides a media for the diffusion of those nutrients into the blood, and it also offers a great protection against pathogens. There's many bacteria living in the GI tract, and those bacteria could be helpful for me if they are in the GI tract, but anywhere outside of there, they might cause problems. So this mucosa is the first layer of defense against this bacteria inside the GI tract. The layers of the mucosa, if we separate that big layer into its more elemental components, to say it that way, I have an epithelium, which gives me protection against self-digestion. Let's remember that we have in there gastric juices, very, very low pH or a very, very acidic pH that can hurt the cells. So I have this layer of, or this epithelium that protects me against that, so that my own cells are not digested by my GI tract. The lamina propria, it's there for providing nutrients to the GI tract, and the muscularis mucosa, it's smooth muscle that is there for movement of the mucosa, to keep the mucosa secretions moving along the GI tract. So my epithelium, lamina propria, and muscularis are that very basic first layer of a GI tract. If we kind of like look a little bit going into the outside now, we have a submucosa, which is external to that mucosa. It's composed of areolar tissue, which is a rich supply of blood and lymph vessels, as well as nerve vessels to direct the functioning of the movement of this mucosa layer. So it's like an accessory layer to the mucosa layer, that submucosa. Moving on to the second one, we have the muscularis externa. Muscularis, because it involves a lot of muscle of the GI tract. It's responsible for the peristalsis, or that wave movement that the GI tract is going to do, as well as the segmentation, or the mixing of the food and the nutrients with those gastric juices. If we look at the muscularis externa, and we are about this layer here, which would be the most internal layer of the second of the basic layers. In the muscularis externa, I am going to find sphincters, and this is a very important term for us to remember. Sphincters are circular layers of muscle that's kind of like a thicker kind of like area in the GI tract, and they serve as a valve to control the passage of materials as they move along the GI tract. And one very important thing about sphincters, besides controlling the movement of materials down here, it's to prevent the backflow. I want things to move in one direction and one direction only. So by opening and closing sphincters, I can push nutrients down the GI tract, and by closing that sphincter back, I prevent that food from moving up into the digestive tract and back into the stomach. That might create several problems. The third of my layers would be the serosa layer. This is the outermost layer of intraperitoneal organ, of the visceral peritoneum. And in that external layer, in that serosa, I have the adventitia, which binds the esophagus to the surrounding structures. Remember that nothing gets loose inside of the human body. So what holds the GI tract in place, that would be that serosa membrane. That serosa membrane out here, the most external layer of all of that. It helps keep everything in the place that it should be. And that is pretty much the basics of what the digestive system it's going to be. We have an idea of some of the functionings that are happening in there, some organs that are a part of this, and an overview anatomy, or a microscopic anatomy of the components that make the gastrointestinal tract. Let's start talking about that journey. Let's begin with the first of the organs that actually has to do with the process of digestion. Everything starts at the mouth. This is where the mechanical breakdown of food is going to occur, and we have some organs in here, some structures that we should be familiarized with. The first of them all, it's the tongue. The tongue, it's made of interlacing skeletal muscle, and the function of the tongue is to grip the food and position that food under the teeth so that I can break it down with my teeth. I'm pretty sure you've never thought about the tongue in this way. We always think as the tongue as this receptor for taste, but actually the tongue, besides allowing us to have that sense, that special sense of taste, it also helps with the mechanical breakdown of food by positioning the food under the teeth, so that when I close my mouth, I can break that food apart. So a bolus, it's food that is mixed with saliva, and that is another one of the functions that occurs in the mouth. It's to get all this food wet and moist with saliva so that it has a smoother movement down the track. I have a lingual frenulum in there, and this is the structure that secures the tongue to the to the bottom of the mouth, and it limits the movement. So it controls the movement of the tongue. The lingual frenulum, it's this structure that when it is a little bit too big on people, sometimes they require surgery to release the lingual frenulum to facilitate speech, because too short or too thick lingual frenulum would limit too much of the movement of the tongue. Filiform papillae are it's a roughened surface for increased friction. It also controls the passage down into the gastrointestinal tract. And finally, I have what it's called the terminal sulcus, which divides the root from the root of the mouth from the body of the tongue. And this is my terminal sulcus around this area of the tongue. So those are just some things that we have in the mouth. Of course, we have the teeth in there as well. Now we'll mention them in a couple of minutes. But this is some of those basic structures that have to do primarily, at least in this topic, with mechanical breakdown of food. So another very important associated organ in here is the salivary glands. What produces the saliva to keep the mouth moist? Okay? That would be the salivary glands. Let's talk about saliva a little bit. Saliva is composed mainly of water. About 97 to 99% of this liquid, it's just pure water. And I can find there are some electrolytes that might help with enzymatic functions. I have the digestive enzymes that are the beginning of the chemical breakdown of the food. I'm going to have some proteins. I'm going to have metabolic waste. I'm going to have several things that would make up the saliva, but at the most, it's just water. Some functions of saliva is going to be to maintain the mouth clean, to dissolve the food or the initial dissolving of the food, to moist the food, because I need this to be moist when it moves down the GI tract. And very important, I have amylase there. It's a very important enzyme that has the ability to break down starchy foods or long chains of carbohydrates. So the digestion of this large thing. So if you think about eating a potato, eating bread, when you put it in your mouth, it kind of like dissolves in your mouth if you think about it. One of the reasons why this happens is that amylase is there and it can break down food even further. Most saliva is produced by major extrinsic glands. One of them would be the parotid gland. This is a gland that the facial nerves run through it. It could be located kind of like below of your ear. I have a submandibular gland that opens at the base of the lingual frenulum. And then I have the sublingual gland that opens at the floor of the mouth. Here we have the sublingual gland, and then I have the submandibular gland, and we can use their names or their anatomical names to kind of like find them if we are presented with a diagram or anything of the sort. All right, so talking about this teeth now, because teeth are a very important component of mechanical breakdown, and we all know that teeth in humans, they change with time as we mature. We have the deciduous teeth, or what we call the baby teeth, and appear at the age approximately of 6 months, and we have 20 of this deciduous teeth. After the maturation of the person, we have the permanent teeth, and they develop after the root of the deciduous teeth gets reabsorbed and fallen off. So it's a normal process where the body will auto-dissolve the roots of the teeth, so they become loose, and then we shed them away. This is where all the tooth fairy thing kind of like comes from when you're growing into a young adult. It's pretty much to open the space for the permanent teeth. There is 32 permanent teeth depending on the presence of the wisdom teeth. This is an evolutionary remnant of our old days. Some people will have this wisdom tooth. They appear around the age of 19, 20 years old, but not everyone, not every single person gets their wisdom teeth out. And I said that this is like a evolutionary remnant, because in some people's mouth they would fit In other people's mouth, they won't, and they create a lot of problems moving the teeth around. They are very painful to have. So it's kind of like one of those little things that it's a proof of the evolution of humans into what we are now. So in terms of types and functions of your teeth, you have incisors, canines, premolars, and molars, and all of them, because of their shape, they have a specific function. The incisors are flattened teeth. They are for cutting. They are for nipping off food. This is where you kind of like chew things off or cut it into smaller pieces initially. You have the canines that are for tearing, and they are for piercing into more stronger food like meat. And the molars and the premolars are there for grinding and crushing the food to aid with that surface area, making that much surface area um, with the food, so that the enzymes can work with them a lot better. As of now, we're still talking about breaking the food mechanically with very little enzymatic action, which is amylase, its response for this type of enzymatic food. Let's look at a teeth on the inside. If we look at it on the outside, we have the crown, which is the exposed part of the tooth. We have the gingiva, which is the gums, pretty much an alive tissue around there. We have an enamel, which is a ceramic-like material that bears the force of chewing. This is a very, very, very strong material. It is non-living material, and pretty much the enamel, it's the thing that suffers with acidic foods or not proper hand mouth washing. If we lose the enamel of our teeth, it's not regenerated, so it's gone forever. A little bit deeper or under the enamel, we have the dentin, which is a protein-rich bone material that absorbs shock, so it's like a shock absorber. So our teeth are not very, very, very brittle. And deep into the center part of my teeth, I have my pulp cavity, which contains soft tissue, connective tissue, blood vessels, and nerve fibers. The root of the tooth, it's pretty much hidden below the gum line. There's where I'm going to find my root canal, which is the passage for the pulp. And if we look at our picture, here we have the pulp of the tooth, and here we have the canal that it's going down through the root canal. This is what we call the root canal. And at the end of the more distal end of a tooth, they have the apical foramen, which allows the blood vessels and nerves to enter the pulp cavity. Remember, teeth are like little rocks, pretty much. So they need an opening for all of these materials to go in there. Why are we talking about the teeth now in the mouth? Teeth are not bones. Teeth are made of completely different things. Enamel, dentin, dentinal tubules. So I don't have osteocytes or anything like that in teeth. So teeth are not considered bones. Just to put that out there. So talking about cavities, which is probably something that most of us have dealt with at some point in our lives, dental caries or cavities are response. It's a response, or bacteria are responsible for producing this thing. And what happens is that when bacteria are eating food or things left in the surface of our teeth, they start generating some waste products that cause it causes demineralization of the tooth enamel. It dissolves the tooth enamel, creating holes or spaces. So a cavity would be pretty much an open hole in a tooth. And I kind of like put that distinction out there because I have had questions before in the past where some students might be misleaded or confused, thinking that cavities are some sort of organism that would eat up at your teeth and their name is a cavity. Well, in reality, a cavity eats a hole that is created by losing the enamel through the action of bacteria. So if I talk about tartar, it's a calcified plaque. So if we leave things or waste on the surface of our teeth for a prolonged period of time, it gets calcified, it gets really hard, it forms a very, very strong material, and it has to be pretty much scraped off your teeth if it forms in there. It damages the seal of the gingiva and the teeth. So if you think about this, the gingiva or the gums are making a seal around the tooth so that things cannot go in through it. Food, bacteria, you name it. So this calcified plaque, the calculus, what does it damages the seal and it opens up a gap between the tooth and the gingiva, and bacteria can go in there and they could get into sensitive areas of your pulp. And this could create gingivitis, which is the very early stages of infection. And gingivitis can be observed with redness or swelling around the tooth in the gingiva. If this calculus is not treated, bacteria form pockets of infection right where the apical foramen is. The neutrophils destroy the periodontal ligament. This is what holds the tooth in place. So your own white blood cells attack your tooth, and it breaks the ligaments that hold them in place, and it causes them to become loose. Finally, osteoclasts go into the area. Osteoclasts are cells, or specialized cells that can break down bone tissue. And remember that the tooth are embedded into a space inside of your mandible. So because of this infection, those cells die. Osteoclasts come into place to eat up the infection, and it starts breaking down the infected bone. And this could lead up to more serious consequences when you have a bone infection. This is why the reason we every 6 months at the minimum go to the dentist, we get our cleanings done, we remove all of the calculus from the tooth, we observe what's happening to kind of like get to these things on time. Kind of like a very, very interesting thing out there. This is just a little video showing you what happens during root canal. Sometimes a very painful procedure, but whenever we have a serious infection in the pulp or the root of the tooth, then all that pulp needs to be removed. The infection needs to be cleaned out, and a filling it's added into the tooth to kind of like fill up the area after all of that. And sometimes a crown it's needed because it needs to be stronger, right? When we do this, we compromise the integrity of the tooth, so it needs to be reinforced, and that's where the crown comes into play. All of this, it's thanks to bacterial infection, once again. So, like we said, the digestive process begins in the mouth. This is where ingestion, or putting food into our mouth, is. We have the mechanical breakdown, which involves chewing, and then we have the initiate propulsion, or pushing things down into the gastrointestinal tract, or the GI tract, and this is done by swallowing. It begins the digestion of polysaccharides thanks to the action of the enzyme amylase, and the nutrients are not absorbed through the mouth, so nothing is being absorbed to your blood through the mouth. The mouth pretty much is there for mechanical breakdown of the food. So that's kind of like a very important thing to kind of like keep in mind out there. So that will be it for the part one of the big journey. We are in the mouth. We talked about several things here, some organs, accessory organs, saliva, production of that saliva, layers of the GI tract, and some structures of the mouth and how they work, and anatomically how do they look like. So that will be it for this video. So I will see you on the next part when we move a little bit further down into the GI tract, when we make our stop at the stomach. Thank you for your attention, and I will see you on the next one.